Welcome to what every golf instructor needs to know about KVEST. We're here with Tony Morgan. He's a PGA professional. He's also one of the managing partners at KVEST, and we're going to talk big picture with him. We'll talk with John Dunnigan and Jim Beadle about the specifics and technical aspects of what's going on at KVEST. But here at Golf and Life, we like to hear the aspects of the story of a company, where this came from and where this is headed. So that's why I'm excited to have Tony. Tony, how's it going, man?
Good, you?
Good. So, let's go back. KVEST has actually been around for a long time. I don't know if a lot of people realize that. 13, 14 years ago, you guys launched. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. The first PGA show was back in 2005. So, yeah, I've been around a little while.
And, at that transition, there was a lot of video going on. Technology was in its infant stages, I would say, right? Launch monitors were still in their infancy. Is that right?
Yeah, I think back at the time when we first started, we were using a vector launch monitor. We were using Novell PEDR for foot pressure, and people were just really getting into looking at things that were happening in the ground, things that were happening in the body, and then ultimately what was happening with the club and golf ball. So it really was the brand new day of figuring out how to use technology in a golf lesson.
Cool. So that's fascinating. So, talk to me about where did you guys start? What was the initial technology that you guys had and the initial premise when you came to market?
Yeah, definitely the initial thought was we knew by being able to measure what a player's body was doing and then be able to understand that data and how it's affecting a golf club and a golf ball, we knew there was going to be the value there. The problem was the technology in the market was really expensive at that time. We were actually using a medical system, an electromagnetic system that was based, in the medical world out of Chicago. And we saw the application. We actually had a couple PGA Tour players fly up, and we literally put them on this medical system to try and figure out what was going on in the golf swing. And I think at that time, we were looking at biomechanics, but we were also using biofeedback. We were using 6DOF biofeedback and just seeing how fast the types of changes that you could actually make with a player were amazing. So the problem was there was nothing very specific for golf, and there was nothing that was really easy to use. So our initial idea right out of the gate was to take an inertial sensor that was measuring 3DOF and then build software so that it would be accessible to really the early adapters in the golf market. And so that's really where we started in 2005.
Well, I guess dig into that core reason a little bit. What were you guys looking for that you flew the players up and you got them on the software? What were you trying to figure out? Or what was that initial thing?
Yeah, I think everybody could agree. If you look back at where golf instruction was 20 years ago and you look at where it is today, at least we have a lot of people communicating on these topics. And so, golf was very far away from being standardized in the instruction. And not that it needs to be standardized. It's not a franchise. But if you went to go get 15 different golf lessons 10 years ago, they were going to be very, very different golf lessons. People weren't measuring the body. Back at that time, they were just really starting to measure the club and the ball. So really, we were looking at video. We didn't really understand the ball flight laws. And, we were trying to, a lot of times with players, just get a very quick fix. So I think when we look at the technology, it gave us a really good idea of what the player's body was doing. From an orientation and a sequence side, and those things made big changes to the industry, so that you could really measure what someone's posture was and what the timing was on the backswing and how that affected the club releasing and coming into impact. So all those things were big. So just to be able to measure for the first time and then figure out how this was going to be implemented into a lesson, the challenge was it was still complicated. So going from 2D video into biomechanics for even an early adopter, it was a process. I mean, I literally remember sitting in there watching all these, looking at these graphs going, how do these really affect ball flight? And if you didn't have the discipline or time to be able to figure that stuff out, it was challenging for someone. So a lot of this process has been, it's interesting over the years. It's, there's 4 key components to our business as we've talked about. You've got measure, assess, coach, and train. And if you look at those things, I think what we did a good job of, we've really tried to do a better job of as the years have gone by, is make sure all 4 of those buckets are understood, but they're also easily implementable into a golf lesson. So as we measure more in the industry now, we're looking at measuring more things using different types of technologies. It's just making sure that if we can't use that system to get better player outcomes, and then more importantly, help golf coaches develop better business models for their business, we just really have to look at why we're doing this, because not everybody's going to be a researcher. And research is awesome, but if you can't improve player performance, then we need to let the research people be the research people. And then we want to focus more on what's the practical application of the technology and applying it to get those two outcomes for both the business and for the player side.
Yeah, and you guys obviously saw, one of the problems with technology is you can do half of that circle, which is the measuring and assessing, but you have to complete the loop, which is the training, the coaching and the training. So, yeah, and that obviously took a while for you guys to simplify that into that process, right? Like that's a new thing for KVEST in a sense.
It is. It's just a different way to look at it. Like if you look at some of these high-end academies today, I, in fact, had this conversation with a few pretty high-end coaches at the PGA show this year. And if you look at really top-level golf academies where you have someone there and they have a big name, and that player comes into an academy, they take a lesson from this top-level coach, and we see it all the time. And the top-level coach, what do? They do the measure, and they do assess. They start to do some coaching, and then what happens a lot of times is the player then goes with another professional, right, on the team of that coach. But what happens is there's a level of quality control that's lost when the player leaves the top level coach and then they go to the next coach down. And it's not because of a lack of knowledge. It's just the systems aren't there to monitor the coaching and the training. So if the measurement and assessment's been done, hey, here's your launch monitor data. If we start from the ball going backwards, here's what's going on with your body. Here's what's going on with the ground. And based on what I saw today, we're going to make a program, and you're going to be able to train to that program. So the coach and train part of it now, just even in this one example, can be transferred over to another coach. But the high-level coach now doesn't have to be looking across the academy and shaking his head because, the assistant's over there missing something. We let the technology, right? We really let the technology help the coaches make sure that the practice is done right. Because practice is great, but if it's the wrong practice, that's really a problem in the market today. Some facilities have really great measure and assess, meaning they can build a good program for a player, but it doesn't always mean that program gets done right. And so we really want to make sure, like you said, that entire learning loop is done right. And we also make that really easy for coaches to implement into their business. Because the more a coach can see how they can implement that whole model into their business, it also becomes easier to bring on other staff because there's a quality control dynamic now that happens in the market. You don't have to be so reliant on that coach's eye.
So you guys started with the Chicago, the medical staff. You brought some players up to look at it. When did you feel like this is something, like this is actually going to work and this is going to be really beneficial for a lot of people? When was that moment for you?
Well, I think when you start to see other people do it, when it's not just yourself, when you actually see players in the market. I mean, I think one of the biggest things is when you see a player, using, let's just say, biofeedback and really starting to understand how motor learning works. Now, there's a time to use biofeedback. There's also a time to pull biofeedback away. We get that. So, but just understanding that the communication process between the player and the coach is so much simpler that I can literally build them a program. I can walk away and I know those things are being done right. I go back now and I watch lessons giving and how much talking there is, and it's amazing. And you almost forget now like what that process used to be like before this technology was around. You're constantly touching the player. You're constantly a little more here, or a little more there. Here's where I need your right hand or whatever. And now it's like just to be able to build a program and let them train on their own and self-discover and literally let them look at you and go, what do you want me doing? And going, well, you need to figure it out. Like, you need to figure this out on your own. You have the system in front of you. It's okay for them to struggle and be challenged and learn. That's part of the process. And then also be able to remove those systems to see if they've really ingrained it, because then you can add pressure, right? You can add pressure from the sense of, do they have the motor skill now down on its own? No club in hand. You can test the motor skill now by putting a club in their hand. You can test the motor skill now by adding a golf ball. You can test the motor skill by adding a target, and you can test the motor skill by adding pressure. So these motor skills, if we look at them, if somebody doesn't even know how to move their torso using their core, they don't even understand the concept of that and how it affects how the hands and wrists load or unload in the downswing. There's different phases of just taking that one concept, adding skill or progressions, changing tolerances, changing variables, making the program more random versus block. All of these things just on one simple pattern can really make it dynamic. And so I think that's where, if you look at where the market will go now, we're going to have these research groups that do all this great stuff. But at the end of the day, it has to get back to the players. And the measure and assessing, the greater we get, the different types of technology we use, because they're coming, right? And they're coming to KVEST as well. But the great thing is, the more they come, the more we have to make sure that we're completing the learning loop in the right way, because if we don't, it can be a really challenging thing for golf, because it's going to go right over the players' heads. And I'd say the first 4 or 5 years in the business, we learned that the hard way. We've got to make this simpler for the players. And one of the best things about technology is it should make things simpler, not more complicated. But that happens in time.
Let me throw one at you here. So let's say I'm an instructor at a resort or in South Florida or somewhere like that, right? And you're like, hey, Tony, dude, I think what you're saying is awesome, but the people that I'm working with, like, they're not going to get better, that much better in the time that I'm seeing them. They're just here for the weekend. I don't really need this technology, right? Like, or what do you say to someone like that in a position that's like, I'm just working with these high handicappers. They're not that great. They're not going to get that great. Like, what do you do?
Well, I think what's really neat about where we are today is the level of process that we can make improvement using a process that we can make with a player is far beyond where we were 20 years ago. So when a new player comes to you and you've seen this program work, and there's a progression, and once again, we don't have a particular style in the way that we do things. We're a platform. So no matter how you coach, the system fits your style. So, but by having someone come in, even if it was for, look, I worked for 3 or 4 different golf schools over a 3 or 4 year period. So I get it. Players are coming in, half of it's entertainment. They're there to have a good time with their family. But even in that environment, people want to get better. And for the people that do want to get better, you can literally come in now, and instead of just being out there and just repeating bad patterns all the time, that's what happens. That's the problem. So we have to look at, where is that coming from? Where is that coming from? We are allowing players to make bad patterns. And they might be making it really good when they're in front of you, but what happens when you walk away and you're 3 people down the row right now, and that player goes, it happens all the time. The player goes back to their bad patterns. Hey, John, I'm hitting it bad again. You got 2 more minutes, because as soon as you walked away, right, they lost it. And so those are some of the things that we can do to really help those players get monitored better. So really that every session, whether it's 10 minutes or 20 minutes or a half hour, it's making sure that they're done right, and the way the coach wants them to do it. And it's also based on what they can physically do. That's where there's a level of customization comes in that's really important.
So talk to me about that. You said that it works with any coaching style, and I think a lot of people might think of like, hey, the biofeedback, might not be right for this guy that had, hip surgery or something. Like, he doesn't have that proper thing. Is this customizable? How does it work for any model?
Yeah, so the coach determines it, right? Like, there's a starting point of what the best players in the world do. Now, we know that it's a very simple baseline and it's not customized on the players. So once you capture a couple swings, what we're obviously trying to do is we're trying to maximize this player's ability for what they can functionally do, what their concepts are, the way that they use the ground, the way that they release the club and use their wrists. There's all these patterns, and certain instructors are going to go for more hands and arms movement based on what they're looking for. Some people are going to go more to the body. Some people are going to go to the ground. Some players are going to start at impact. Coaches will start at impact and work their way back. Some are going to start at address, and maybe that's based on periodization and where a player is within their program and how much time they have. So there's just all these variables. So the main thing is, when you go into the KVEST or you go into the software, you can customize that program for that player. So one, I can start with any sensor wherever it is on the body, and then I can also change the range. So if I've got a player that can only move back X far because they've got limitations, Well, then I just click one button and that becomes the rotation for that player. And then I can also change that tolerance, make it easier, make it harder, and I can do that over time to make that skill more challenging for the players. So, those are all things. Mass customization is really important, or this doesn't work. We can't put everybody into a box. It has to be customized, but it's also got to be simple to customize it. So those are both really important parts of the platform.
All right. Let's hear some stories. So, like some of the best, whether it's results that students have got or that coaches, these stories from coaches that you've heard, like what are some things that stand out over these past years of students using KVEST in action?
Yeah, I think the biggest stories that we hear are just things that you find that you wouldn't have found without using the system. And I think at the end of the day, whatever the stories that we're all looking for, it's we're looking for to help our player go down the right path. So, one I can think about is, somebody was using a 3D system and moved to a 6D system, and within the first couple of weeks found that there was a sway issue that was really affecting path, and was looking at all these different things in 3D and found it in 6D. And people that have gone from not measuring at all to starting to measure opens up an entire world. And then when you start using biofeedback with players, I mean, look, players that are brand new golfers now, how many times do you walk up and down a range and players are not in great posture? And it's absolutely amazing. There's all these in-depth conversations in the marketplace about all this stuff. And you walk down the average driving range and guys and gals don't even know how to set up to a golf ball. So there are such basic problems, and those things affect everything down the chain. They affect how energy is transferred, how people use the ground, how to help square up the club face at impact. Just that one little thing. So I guess our big thing is like, if we can just help people do very basic things to move better, the game just becomes a lot easier. So a lot of the stories that we've heard, I get a call that goes, hey, coach that says, hey, I'm excited about measuring all this stuff. It's just simply not that exciting. I'm glad that you measure it and, you want to look at this stuff. But at the end of the day, it's really the stories about players coming in and players getting better. We, in fact, just did a study on a girl on our website called Player Number One, and that's a great one. And that's literally from someone that trained at home, right? They trained at home on their own and over a small period of time had huge improvements. And the progression was cool because not only did the TrackMan data get better progressing on their own and practicing on their own the right way, but it's also got to be transferable to the golf course. And so a lot of times it's very easy to sit in the studio and change numbers on the TrackMan, but you still got to go tee it up and you got to learn how to, control face and path when water's on the right and trouble left and all these things, and the player went out and had huge improvements to the scores. So to see the transfer, right, the skill from a movement pattern side, to see how that then affected the launch monitor data, that's great. But now we actually have to get away from all this stuff. We got to get onto the golf course and we got to play golf. And then to see the scores come down, the distance go up, the shot patterns get better, these are all big deals. So I think there's a lot of stories about players getting better with coaches. I think the really cool thing the next 5 years now will be is how many players can actually now get better working on their own once the coach has measured and assessed the player, and they can now transfer the biofeedback program and the player can go practice on their own using K-Player. I think that's going to be awesome because now it's still the program that the coach built, but now they're actually doing it on their own and it's not dependent on the coach's time, right? But the quality control is there. I think those stories are going to be fascinating because if this works the way we think it's going to do, it's going to change coaches' lives, and it's also going to change players' lives because there's just going to be a lot more access to improvement.
You use the word transfer. I'm a massive fan of that word because that's what golf learning should be, right? Is a transfer from a learning environment to a performance environment. Why does transfer work when you've seen students working with KVEST, whether it's biofeedback or whatever it is? Why does that transfer work, do you think?
Yeah, well, look, I think if you think about what happens in a lot of golf lessons, right? A student is coming in with a concept, right? And if they've taken multiple lessons prior, especially with a lot of different instructors, they can have a lot of different concepts roaming around in their head up there. So a big part of this is just the player really understanding the concept of what we're working on. If it's a club face orientation in the backswing, okay, great. How are we going to change that pattern to get the player to understand it? But then the big thing is we've got to get the player to be able to do enough repetitions to make sure that that now does not have to be an internal thought, right? And this is the thing is a lot of times the bridge between internal thinking to playing in more of an external environment, that's a really important conversation for coaches to have. When players don't get enough quality repetition in, they never are able to get out of internal thought. So my coach said, I'm working on this today. We did it 4 or 5 times. We hit some shots. I saw better ball flight. And what happens now is they go play. Guess what? They have to think about what they were doing because they didn't do enough reps, right? They didn't do enough reps that they can focus on the pins back right and they want to hit a high cut into the flag. That movement's not going to just automatically happen. They have to do enough quality practice of that movement so that they can get external and still have that movement applied. So the transfer is really important. And the transfer in a sense that the movement transfers, but you can also get the movement to transfer while thinking externally.
Cool. No, I love that. That's really good. So let's talk about the future of where you're heading. We talked about this learning loop, which is something that you guys are really excited about now, especially with the K player being out and the ability to train on that so well. Where are you guys headed? Where's the technology headed? Where's the software headed? I mean, what can we expect over the next year, couple years from KVEST?
Yeah, there's a lot of very exciting things on the road here in the next coming years. So, I think the biggest thing is once people understand the learning loop of measure, assess, coach, and train, they'll start to understand that everything that we bring to the market will be into that context. So I think whether you're looking at, measuring more things, right? There's a lot of great conversations in the industry happening right now. We're measuring a lot of great stuff, but we got to make sure that we can complete the learning loop with it. So I think you're going to see a lot of great things. We've already got brand new technology out. We just launched brand new sensor technology at the PGA show. We'll actually I'll show you one of the new sensors. So that's really cool. And then I think, the garment system is all new now that you put on your body. So, new sensors, new garments. We have a brand new software platform out. Thanks, bud. So this is actually the new sensor here. It's a lot smaller. It's not, not a much ton bigger than my thumb. And, that's pretty, it's a lot easier to put on the body. So from a hardware side to a garment side, new software. We have a new online education portal that's going to be coming out to help coaches use this technology. So at the end of the day, if you really look at what true north is for us, it's 2 things. It literally comes down to 2 things. It's continually help coaches improve player outcomes. That's number 1. Everything we do, we have to look at it in this context. We can't just say, hey, here's all this new data that you can now measure. And then the coach brings it in and the guy's got this ball flight and he looks at the data and he doesn't understand how that's affecting that. So that's really important. And we actually have a couple of partnerships coming that are going to really help address that topic there specifically. And the other one is we got to help coaches better leverage their time, right? There's coaches out there that primarily have 2 problems. One, they're very successful, so they're sold out, and there's just nothing else that they can do with their time. So they can probably do one of 2 things, right? They can hire another assistant golf professional, which has its own risks and challenges, or they go out and they create a product. They write a book. They develop a training aid, right? These are the ways that coaches go, all right, I'm already successful. What am I going to do to get to the next level? They do one of those 2 things. Now it's going to become, how do we help them build this ecosystem where they can do the measure and assess, and then they have a revenue stream based around getting their players to coach and train, and especially when the player's not right in front of them there. So building out, making sure all parts of this ecosystem really work is really important. So it's not just building a program, sending it to the player. It's just, what do both relationships need and need to look at to really make this work? So I think you're going to see a lot of that in the coming year. A lot more players doing remote-based coaching programs. People are going to be taking technology home and practicing. You're going to see, there's a lot of stuff and some really good partnerships coming as well that will help foster our two true north things as well.
No, that's incredible. I think that conversation is going to get a lot of coaches and instructors excited. Make sure to check out the conversation with Jim Beadle. He talks in depth about that business side with the K player and the training and all that stuff. So make sure to check that one out. And so, like, who is driving the vision of where KVEST is going? Who's pushing the development of the software, of the technology, and helping you guys craft the future, you could say?
Yeah, good question. So we've got a great advisory board right now that's broken down into some different areas. So, a golf advisory board, some of the top coaches in the world, fitness advisory board, a medical advisory board. So, there's different applications for all of those things. So, one of the biggest things that we like to do is ask questions and what is the market looking for? So, the advisory board is definitely a big driver of where we go with a lot of the features and the things that are coming because, look, they're out there working with the best players in the world. So that's definitely one aspect that we got to continue to focus on is, these guys are out on tour. They're traveling around with tour players, and we want to help the best players in the world get better. But at the same time, we also have, a game that's suffering from growing and losing players. So we also have to look at the bottom of the pyramid as well and say, we got to make sure that we're helping the average player as well or the brand new player, right? There's going to be a huge revolution in the next coming years of how to help beginning players get to a really good level. Like it's really going to change. So the advisory board helps a lot on that front. And then, I think we have some of the best in the industry on our development team. We have really good management. We have some new partners in the company. They're very strategic, and it's just a very exciting time to be a part of the company internally. And, personally, I've been here for 15 years since day one, and we've never been as excited about the future as we are right now, and it's going to be very exciting for our customers and really the golfing market as a whole.
No, I can tell being externally, just like the content you guys are putting out and some of the new things that you're doing, that you guys are making really good progress. It seems to be growing exponentially, the progress that you're making. So if people do have a question or they want to check out what you're doing, where should they go? How do they get in touch?
Yeah, the best way is to go to our website. All of our contact information is on there. So that's www.k-vest.com. And check out, when you go there, check out the Human Motion Lab. Give you an example. I mentioned the Player Number One article earlier. I think we've had close to 15,000 views on that article in the last 2 weeks alone. And that really talks about the story of, this father and mother training their daughter, and really exactly the story of what happened. And it's not all positive. It's real world. This is what it took to get somebody to the next level, but it's a great case story. And so I think the Human Motion Lab on our website is a great place to go because you can actually see what we're doing with the data. A lot of our advisory board members are up there writing articles on how they're using the system. So once you get to the website, check those out. And then from there, there's a contact us page, and you can get in touch with anybody domestically or internationally.
Fantastic, Tony. Keep making progress with the company and keep helping teachers around the world get better student results. Thank you so much, man.
Awesome. Thanks, Cordy.